Okay, good morning and welcome everybody to the PennOhio technical session today, May 18th. We have a great lineup for you today. For those of you that are online, we're going to start off, our first presentation of the day is going to be Brady Volpe, founder of the Volpe firm, Nimble This, and many publications, trainings, and academic materials and developments. Looks like he logged out and logged back in. We're working through some technical difficulties. We have a great lineup for you today.
I'm unmuted now. For some reason, GoToMeeting just hung up on me and would not let me unmute. So if you can make me presenter, I can go ahead and get started. I apologize for the technical difficulties there.
Yep, no worries, Brady. We'll make you presenter momentarily, and we look forward to hearing your presentation. So thank you very much for all of your contribution to the industry and to the PennOhio chapter today. So thank you, and it's all yours.
All right, and thanks, John, for trying to buy me some time there too. Now I just have to get to the presentation, PowerPoint, show this window. So now we have audio, and we should have video as well. Is my screen visible?
Yep.
All right, thanks all. Thanks everyone for joining today. Happy Wednesday, I think it is. Today's presentation is going to be it's really a very basic Pnm presentation, which the chapter asked me to give for everyone. So Pnm basics, all you need to know about Pnm. If I don't cover it, feel free to ask questions. And if there's questions that come up that are relevant to the topic at hand, I definitely encourage anyone to interrupt me and ask questions. I'll be happy to take them on the fly. Agenda, we're going to be talking about, why be proactive? What is Pnm? How does Pnm work? We'll see some Pnm in action, and we'll talk just a little bit about the future of Pnm. And again, for everyone watching, I'm really going to be focused on the very basics of Pnm, Pnm pre-equalization. I'm not really going to be getting into things like full band capture and some more of the advanced things. We're going to be pretty basic here. Make sure everyone really gets back to the roots of Pnm pre-equalization, how it works, and we'll cover any topics that anyone may want to do a little deeper dive on in this presentation. Make sure people understand root cause in that. A little bit about myself. So I've been in cable now for 30 years. The picture on the left of me shows what I looked like when I started in cable, and picture right of me, well, it should look a little bit like what I do now without glasses. So when I started in cable 30 years ago, 30 years ago, hey, there wasn't cameras, so I get kind of grainy photos. My wife and I joke about, in 1992 when you took pictures, it was all 35 millimeter film, so you were really careful about when you took a picture. So I don't have very many pictures that are good of me back in the early 90s. Part of this story that I talk about, though, now that I'm giving presentations, when I started in cable 30 years ago, I was like, talked to my boss. I said, yeah, I don't think I'm going to be in the cable industry for very long, because cable's not going to be around for very long. So, we're really just doing one-way video. Fiber is going to be a big thing probably in 5 years. This was 30 years ago, remember? In the next 5 years, everyone's going to have fiber optic cable. Coax is dead. Fast forward 30 years, here I am. We're still having the same conversations. Oh yeah, cable's going to be gone. Fiber's going to be everywhere in 5 years. I think it's going to happen, guys. We're still getting a lot of life out of cable. If we look at, DOCSIS 3.1 specs, DOCSIS 4 specs, we can see that happening. So my history, 30 years, started off as an RF engineer working at Secor Electronics, where John Downey also started. My wife also started there. We all started in the cable industry together, and we just keep going, and it keeps getting more and more excited. The technology we're working on today is just so far advanced from where we were 30 years ago. So I think, if you're new in the cable industry, it is an exciting industry to be in. And if you've been working in the cable industry, like some of us are getting lots of gray hair, you kind of know what we're talking about there. It keeps you busy, and it's a fun industry to be in. So back onto topic, Pnm, proactive network maintenance. Why be proactive? We're kind of a reactive industry. We're really, really good at being reactive. When a customer's cable modem goes offline, we know how to fix that. When there's an outage, we know how to fix that. proactive is sort of a different beast, right? We're trying to fix things before it actually impacts a subscriber. It's an entirely different mindset in our industry, but it does give us opportunities, and it's something that's becoming more of a need in our industry, particularly as we've seen over the past couple of years with people working at home, learning from home. You know, data is just such a critical infrastructure. Some new reports coming out saying how people are even starting to get more aggressive at just dropping video data, and over the top's becoming more and more important for everyone. So the more we can do to become proactive, fix problems before they happen is important for our industry. It's important for our name brand. It's important for keeping customers. So that reactive versus proactive concept. Reactive is when there's an outage, we fix that outage. We have lots of applications that can look at forward error correction, you know, our FAC, Reed-Solomon, LDPC. We can see when there's low power on modems, if there's impairments like CPD, narrowband interferes, laser clippings, things like that. We got lots of metrics, monitoring dashboards that can say if there's an impairment that's impacting customers, taking customers offline, we know how to react to that. Proactive, that's a little bit of a different story. These are when there are impairments that are not taking customers down, that we don't have subscribers calling about it, but we can see that slow degradation in the network. And one thing I'll always like to say is, you know, our networks don't heal themselves. They don't get better over time, particularly in the physical layer, in the RF domain. We get some corrosion on cable. That corrosion is only going to get worse over time. Water will continue to intrude in networks. Loose connectors don't tighten themselves naturally. And so that's where we have the opportunity to get proactive. We have tools, and that falls into the whole realm of P&M that identifies those issues, gives us the opportunity to go out, fix problems. Maybe we're out doing reactive work, and we can look at our proactive tools and say, hey, what in this area is already degrading? We know it's not going to get better over time, so we can fix these while we're there, and that's being proactive. So we can eliminate customers who are going to, you know, maybe next week, next month, they're going to call in and they're going to generate a reactive call. So being proactive while reactive gives us a great opportunity to start fixing reactive things that are going to be reactive later on. A big concept behind being proactive. So to understand how to be proactive, we have to understand what PNM is and how PNM works. So what is PNM? PNM, it is that a proactive approach to fixing impairments, ideally while we're out there being reactive. So we can kind of just start to put out these small smoldering fires before they become, you know, complete blazes that, you know, now we're back in that reactive mode, running around trying to address issues. We do that using the existing hardware that we have out there, cable modems, EMTAs, set-top boxes, and the CMTSs or CCAPs that all these devices talk to. We kind of treat them as IoT devices because we have many of them out there. We constantly pull them. We look at what the downstream and upstream impairments are. This enables us to localize where these impairments are. So first of all, is it in the subscriber's house or is it in the outside plant? And that's kind of an important piece of information to know, because if one subscriber's calling, complaining about issues, slow downstream speeds, upstream speeds, kind of good to know, should I send a technician to that subscriber's house because it's just an issue in their house, or is it an outside plant issue where, you know, I could spend all day at that subscriber's house, replace their modem, all their in-home wiring, but if it's an outside plant issue, I'm never going to be able to fix that in the subscriber's home. And that's kind of a nice thing of P&M, and we can also do that with reactive tools too. But P&M, as we'll see, gives us some additional visibility into impairments that we don't often see with reactive tools. Another thing about P&M is we keep evolving. It keeps getting better over time. And we kind of stagnated on our reactive tools because there's only so much information we can get out of devices. We can add machine learning to reactive tools. We add machine learning to proactive tools. We put these together and we have a really nice ecosystem we can use. So what is pre-equalization? It is a feature in cable modems and also the CMTSs and stuff where we pull what we call pre-distortion or pre-equalization information out of there. And that's kind of telling us what impairments the cable modems are compensating for. And it gives us that visibility that we just really can't see with typical test equipment. And that is kind of what we're going to see in this presentation, and what we're going to focus on in this presentation is that pre-equalization that we get from the cable modems, how that works, how we can determine whether a problem is in the home or in the outside plant. We'll also see some examples of that. We can also get, from most CMTSs, we can get the post-equalization from the CMTS. And that tells us, is the cable modem actually compensating for all the impairments, or is the CMTS now responsible for compensating for those impairments that the cable modem can't compensate for? The pre-equalization that the CMTS actually controls and communicates back to the cable modem is not enabled by default. It is something we have to turn on. Historically, there has been some hesitancy by some operators to turn on pre-equalization because they're concerned that it may cover up plant impairment problems. I think a lot of that hesitancy is now behind us, because most operators have been running pre-equalization for so long. And really what pre-equalization does is it does compensate for a lot of problems. It makes our plant operates better until we can actually fix those impairments. And then what we can do is we can actually, as we'll see in the rest of the presentation, we mine that data out from the cable modems, the pre-equalization data, and then we can identify where the impairments are, the type of impairments, how severe the impairments are. So a lot of the motivation behind actually getting this pre-equalization data is based on the fact that we're running around with test equipment, spectrum analyzers, handheld instruments, but we could get most of this data from the cable modems themselves. And we have a whole lot more cable modems, EMTAs, set-top box, residential gateways than we do the handheld meters or spectrum analyzers. So plethora of these cable modems in subscribers' homes gives us the ability to pull data from subscribers' homes 24/7, 365 days a year at any time we want, without actually having to send a technician into a subscriber's home and look at the upstream pre-equalization. Other people may talk about full band capture and how we can see all the downstream signals. So not having to go into a subscriber's home and see everything that's happening in that subscriber's home from an RF standpoint is amazingly powerful. Seeing pre-equalization in action, this next slide is sort of our poster child for how pre-equalization should work. On the left-hand side, we see the cable modem haystack, and just taking a short diversion on that, I recently had an email exchange about what is a cable modem haystack, and why do we call it a cable modem haystack a haystack after all? And they sent a bale of hay to me, and it was like a nice square bale of hay. So why do we call a haystack? Because some people think of a haystack as a bale of hay, but there's many different ways. If you grew up in a farm, and I grew up in Western Pennsylvania around a lot of farms, there's many different ways that you can bale and stack hay, and one of the first ways you can do that is just loosely baling hay in a pile. You can mound hay in a pile so your cows, your horses can just go out and eat that hay. And that was the first concept of why we say a cable modem haystack. So this is the upstream transmit power from your cable modem, and it kind of has like a rounded shape on the top. So that's the cable modem haystack that we think when farmers loosely mound a pile of hay in the field. And you may see this some places in rural areas where you just have a rounded mound of hay piled up for animals to eat. That's what we mean by cable modem haystack, not a square bale of hay that looks nothing at all like the signatures that we're seeing on the screen. So think rounded bale of hay when we say haystack. That's just to clear up any confusion on that. Sorry for the short aside, but I realize there's confusion around haystacks when we talk about cable modem haystacks. So on the left-hand side here, we see a cable modem haystack, that rounded signature, but this one kind of has a lot of tilt from left to right on it. So why does that have tilt? Because this cable modem upstream channel, as you can see, it's really close to 50 megahertz on the upstream. So we have 50 megahertz here, and if you think about it, many of our upstreams, and this is changing over time, but predominantly our upstreams in North America are 5 to 42 megahertz. So 42, would be down here. So think we probably have a diplex filter That diplex filter being that device in fiber nodes and RF amplifiers that separates our return path from our forward path. It just has a low pass and a high pass filter tightly coupled together. So our high pass side of the diplex filter is causing roll off on our cable modem haystack. And this is the cable modem haystack as it reaches the CMTS. That's going to cause a big challenge for the CMTS to demodulate this cable modem signal at the CMTS, probably cause maybe uncorrectable code word errors, cause other issues, and we may end up with a modem that this upstream channel is flapping off and on, could have slow upstream speeds, could have voice issues, many things like that. So we turn on pre-equalization on the cable modem, and what the cable modem is going to do is it's going to transmit the opposite tilt at the output of the cable modem is what we're seeing at the CMTS. So now when we arrive at the CMTS, even in the presence of this diplex filter roll-off, we're nice and flat at the CMTS. We've almost corrected all of the roll-off that we're seeing. So this is what pre-equalization at the cable modem is doing. We're now arriving at the CMTS with a nice flat signal. So that's the benefit of pre-equalization in the cable modem. Here's kind of a conceptual diagram of what's going on. And the source of this diagram, I have a video that narrates this, but we can't do video over this platform. So I dropped this in, and the source of this is either Comcast or Cable Labs. I'd like to give credit where credit's due. I just can't remember where I got this slide, so I apologize for that. So conceptually, here's what's happening with pre-equalization. So back at the cable modem, we're seeing, or at least the CMTS is talking back to the cable modem, and the CMTS is saying, I'm getting some really poor performance from a constellation diagram. I'm having problems demodulating the signal that is arriving at the CMTS, and I'm getting some really poor response. So the CMTS talks back to the cable modem and says, hey, cable modem, please pre-distort your output so the input at the CMTS is nice and flat. And now we'll get a nice constellation diagram at the input of the CMTS for that upstream signal coming from the cable modem. And we can think about what's happening inside of the cable modem. If you think about, old school stereo equalizers where you could adjust your bass, your mid-range, and your treble to get the nice sound that you wanted in your house, basically the same concept is happening in a cable modem. It has a pre-equalizer. It has a 24 tap pre-equalizer, which we'll see shortly. And that 24 tap pre-equalizer will adjust the output of the cable modem to compensate for the impairments, like the impairments of that diplex filter I was mentioning previously, so that when that signal arrives at the CMTS, it's compensated. The same way the pre-equalizer adjusts audio, so when the sound arrives in our ears, it sounds just lovely. It sounds just the way we want that sound to be. And that's, that equalizer for audio is really compensating for impairments that are in our room, like, maybe multipath impairments or sound bouncing off of walls and arriving in our ears in different phases. We're adjusting our equalizer to compensate that. Basically, the CMTS and the cable modem are doing effectively the same thing. They're just compensating for RF impairments. So then what we do in terms of Pnm is we look at these RF impairments, we look at the coefficients, we'll see in a little bit, we look at the frequency response, and then we're able to determine what type of impairments it is, the distance to the impairments. If there's multiple impairments, such as impairment in the outside plant that impact multiple cable modems, then we can correlate those cable modems together and say, well, don't send a technician to the subscriber's home because that's not where the impairment is. It's actually in the outside plant. We can estimate where that impairment is in the outside plant. And then we can collect those impairments over time. We can say, was this an intermittent impairment or is it a continuous impairment? And that gives us even more information on how to diagnose that impairment. And then we can even take that further and we can apply machine learning. We can start to see, and this is how we can start to correlate these things on a map, because we know that the location of every subscriber's cable modem on the map. And we can draw boundaries and start to say, okay, this is basically the location where that is on the map, and that gives us additional information. So this helps our outside plant technician. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have like things with full band capture, that gives us additional information, but that's sort of outside of the scope for this presentation. We're just going to be focused on the pre-equalization part. But again, we really want to take this data so we can quickly identify where the problems are, have a strategy to fix those problems, and ideally, if we're really proactive about this, we ensure that customers don't lose service, and then if they do, customers can call in, and when we're using Pnm in a reactive mode, we know exactly what the problem is and exactly where to go and fix that problem. We'll see that towards the end of the presentation. We see Pnm in action. So how does Pnm work? We'll get into details here. What I want to show here is a tap, and this is really good to be in a room, because I would say, do we all agree this is a tap, or is this a tap? And I'd like to have this slide up right away, because there's two types of taps we'll be talking about a lot in this presentation. On the left-hand side, I have a digital pre-equalizer tap, and on the right-hand side, I have a mainline physical tap that's used to, basically run drops to subscribers' homes. And the vernacular of this can get confusing when I talk about a digital pre-equalizer tap that is impacted by a drop coming from a mainline tap. So keep in mind, a tap is not always a tap. And when I talk about digital taps in a pre-equalizer, please try to keep that separated from a mainline tap that we're using to run a drop to a subscriber's home. So I use taps interchangeably, and sometimes we get them confused. When we talk about digital taps, like the 24 taps, the 24 digital taps in a pre-equalizer in a cable modem, I'm referring to these 24 taps that's shown in this equalizer here. So pre-equalizer coefficients of a cable modem are described as complex coefficients. We have F1 through F24. Those are 24 taps in the pre-equalizer. And as I was mentioning before, we had that like the audio pre-equalizer, where you can adjust the low, the mid, the high to adjust the audio for your ears coming out of a stereo. So these are the 24 taps in the cable modem that the CMTS adjusts. And the CMTS adjusts these digital taps. So the output of the cable modem is compensating for all of your RF impairments. So again, these taps are not the same as your mainline tap running a drop to your subscriber's home, but they're very important to how Pnm works and how the cable modem is compensating for upstream impairments without you even being aware that it's compensating for them. There are taps in DOCSIS 3.1 for OFDMA, and there's a pre-equalizer and a for both a downstream and upstream in DOCSIS 3.1, but that's an entirely different presentation onto its own, and we're going to leave OFDMA pre-equalization out of scope for today's discussion. So how does the CMTS adjust the cable modem pre-equalizer tap? The first step that happens is the cable modem sends a range request to the CMTS, and this is called station maintenance. This happens for every cable modem every 20 seconds. That cable modem is going to send a range request to the CMTS, and that range request is just a very short little message that it sends to the CMTS. The CMTS analyzes that range request for the signal quality of that message. Once the CMTS analyzes the range request, it's going to send back a range response to the cable modem, and it's going to adjust the cable modem's timing, power, frequency, and also the equalizer for the cable modem. So if there's any impairments, this is where the cable modem gets its equalizer timing or its equalizer adjusted. And down at the bottom here, you'll see like what the equalizer messaging looks like. It's just a bunch of hexadecimal characters, but these are really delta adjustments to the cable modem. So the CMTS does not know what the actual cable modem equalizer looks like. It just knows what the delta, what the changes it has to make to compensate for upstream equalizer, or what the impairments are. And that adjustment happens every 20 seconds in the upstream for the cable modem. So I'm trying to catch up with the chats here, but guys, I'm not going to be able to keep up with the chats and maintain my time. But Yeah, I see I missed there's a beer tap, so I should have 3 taps on there, especially with a group of guys here. So we got a mainline tap, a digital tap, and beer taps. We can't confuse beer taps with mainline taps or digital taps. That's something that should be added to the slides. So good call on that one. So anyhow, these this back and forth station maintenance is really how that entire process goes. There's a whole lot more that gets in there as you add more upstream channels. I know John may get in here and want to talk about that. We get into what's called like a T4 multiplier, and so the adjustments for multiple upstream channels can get even more than 20 seconds. But again, you have to go watch some of our YouTube videos to get into the details of that. So moving on beyond this, now, so when we actually get the data, so to query the data from a cable modem to say, how do we make use of this data? We have to fall back to SNMP, or Simple Network Management Protocol. We've been using SNMP since the 80s. It's slow, but it's effective, and we continue to use that. But when we pull those SNMP coefficients from the cable modem, we get a lot of useful information. And the first piece of useful information is the Pre-Equalizer Tap Chart that we see here. And we use this extensively to basically figure out what's going on. So taps to the left of the main tap. And the main tap is tap number 8. So those of you who've been using Pnm, you say, oh yeah, I know what the main tap is. But for those of you who are not, this main tap right here, if there were no impairments at all in the plant, all of the RF energy would be centered on tap number 8, and the taps 1 through 7 would have no RF energy going through them, and taps 9 through 24 would have no RF energy. That means they would just be buried down in the noise floor, and all of our energy would be going through tap number 8. That would be like the ideal scenario. We'd say, hey, there's no impairments in our plant. Unfortunately, that's not what's happening in the screenshot here. So just say see at the bottom here, it says tap to the left of the main tap compensate for group delay. I'll tell you shortly what group delay is. So we can see we have an elevated signature here. That's telling us that we have some group delay. Taps to the right of the main tap compensate for microreflection. I'll describe to you what microreflections are shortly. And then the other thing, we take these taps and we extract this data from taps. We do some fancy math on it, and we come up with this other nice squiggly line here. So we like lots of squiggly lines in Pnm, and this is called Icfr, or in-channel frequency response. And Icfr is the other important aspect of Pnm that can kind of really help us understand what's going on here. Icfr is basically just zooming in on the very top of the cable modem haystack. So remember, our cable modem haystack is just looking at the signal that our cable modems are transmitting to the CMTS. So if we imagine this, if we just drew a line down from here, that would be the very top of the cable modem haystack, and we drew a line down here, we would see the cable modem haystack, and we're just zooming in on the very top of the cable modem haystack. So ideally, that cable modem haystack would be nice and flat on the very top. But in this case, it's not. And keep in mind, this is the output of the cable modem. This is not the input of the CMTS. This is the very output of the cable modem. So at the output of the cable modem, we're doing pre-distortion. That cable modem is distorting its output, kind of like we said, if we're thinking of audio here, we're adjusting our audio equalizer to make the audio, when it arrives at our ears, nice for us. So we're adjusting the output of our audio amplifier. In this case, it's a cable modem, and our cable modem output is non-flat. So we have some impairments. In this case, our impairments, don't take my word for it, it's for group delay right now. We got this nice group delay ramp here. We'll explain that later on, and we'll get some more examples. I said, I'll tell you what microreflections are. So let's talk just a little bit for microreflections. So microreflections, as I said, they're kind of analogous to wireless multipass signals. So what the heck does that mean? So like when we're talking on our cell phones, the output of our cell phone antenna, it can bounce off of buildings and trucks and all kinds of things before it arrives at the cell tower. And that cell tower has to compensate for what we call multipass. That means multiple signals arriving at the cell tower at one time, of the same output for my cell phone. That's called multipath. So anyone who's worked in wireless, they say, oh yeah, I understand what multipath is. That means the cell tower has to adjust for those multiple signals and reconcile that and figure out, well, which signal do I lock to? How do I demodulate that signal? Kind of the same thing in coax cable, even though we're not bouncing off of towers or buildings in coax cable, but we have multiple signals that can happen in coax cable. And that happens when something occurs that's called a micro reflection. And micro reflections occur when we have impedance mismatches. So why do we have impedance mismatches in cable? So coax cable and all devices in our coax network, our HFC network, is supposed to be 75 ohm. And if something happens to a coax cable or an RF amplifier or a connector or any other device that causes it to be something other than 75 ohm, then we have an impedance mismatch. So what could possibly happen in a coax network that would cause our coax cables or our connectors to not be 75 ohm? Well, if they're not tightened, if they're loose, we have a non-75 ohm device. If we have a coax connector that has a dent in it, it's no longer 75 ohm. If we get water in our coax cables, they're no longer 75 ohm. If we get corrosion in our coax plant, it's no longer 75 ohm. So any of these things, and there's much more that can happen that will cause our coax plant to not be 75 ohm. All of these cause impedance mismatches, and all of these cause micro reflections. These all show up in PNM as micro reflections and its badness. Micro reflections cause loss of a signal, attenuation, cause signals to bounce back and forth. We'll see echo cavity shortly, and I have to pick up the speed also. Group delay. So I mentioned diplex filters. So group delay normally occurs near diplex filter roll-off. It causes attenuation of the signals. It causes roll-off of the signals, typically around 42 megahertz, but it can also occur other places in a plant, maybe where we have a suck out in a plant. Lots of places group delay can have. In particular, these two impairments are the hidden impairments that you generally will not see with a handheld test meter. So like what I see so many times is these are the two impairments that is going to cause technicians to do things like replace good cable modems, go to a subscriber's house and take a power measurement, but not have like a no problem found. I've visited this subscriber's house 3 times, but I don't find any problems. So we just keep annoying the subscriber. Subscriber keeps calling back with the same issue, but we're not able to see micro reflections and group delay issues with traditional handheld meters. We can generally only see them with specialized equipment or with PNM, and this is where PNM really shines. So equalization coefficients in practice. So here's where we're able to see micro reflections. So remember, taps to the left of the main tap is tap number 8, shows us group delay. We're not seeing group delay because these taps we don't see that ramp pattern. These taps are low. There's no group delay here. Taps to the right of the main tap are showing us micro reflections. So these taps are elevated above the red line. The red line is normally that threshold of we don't care if it's below the red line, we care if it's above the red line. So we see taps that are elevated above the red line, and we're starting to see a squiggly line out here, a sinusoidal line in our Icfr. The higher the frequency that sinusoidal line is, the greater the probability that's telling us that there's micro reflections in our outside plant. So we see that sinusoidal line, we probably have micro reflections. So we're starting to see a pattern here. We're going to see repeated over and over again. I have micro reflections in our outside plant. So how do we know what the distance to that is? So we can see, so again, just reinforcing that taps to the left of the main tap is group delay. Taps to the right of the main tap indicate micro reflections. So each tap to the right of the main tap. So we only really count distance to the right of the main tap. So if you have a 3.2 megahertz DOCSIS upstream channel, taps to the right of the main tap accumulate in 170 feet increments. If it's a 6.4 megahertz upstream, taps to the right of the main tap accumulate in 85 feet or 26 meter increments. And we're going to actually see how that's calculated in the next slide. So this next slide, courtesy of Comcast, thank you Comcast for putting this elegant slide together. This is an in-home example of how we can estimate digital tap distance calculations. So these are our digital pre-equalizer taps again. And these are we're going to look at what's called an echo cavity, but this is an in-home echo cavity. So as I mentioned in a previous tap, so this is a 6.4 megahertz upstream carrier that we're running in our, so 6.4 megahertz on our upstream. So as I said, for a 6.4 megahertz upstream, each tap to the right of the main tap is 85 feet. So our first impairment here, our first elevated tap is this one here, and that is 3 taps from the main tap. So 1, 2, 3, that's our first elevated tap. So 3 times 85 feet, that's giving us an estimated echo of 255 feet to our impairment. So how do we come up with that echo, that distance of 255 feet? So the very first thing that we have to understand when our Pnm application comes back and says, hey, we have an echo, or we have a distance of 255 feet, and we're going to start seeing these distances shortly. The very first thing we have to understand is we don't start at the back of the cable modem. We never, ever, ever start at the back of the cable modem and just walk 255 feet and say, hey, this is where our problem is. That's one of the biggest fallacies that I think we've experienced over our evolution of Pnm, is that technicians will say, oh, we give them a distance of 255 feet, so many technicians will automatically assume that impairment starts from the back of the cable modem. That's almost never ever where the impairment actually starts from, is from the back of the cable modem. It starts somewhere other than the back of the cable modem, and this example is showing is exactly how that happens. So where the impairment actually starts is we have a corroded tap connector. So remember I said, where does Pnm start? Something that is creating a non-75 ohm impedance mismatch in our plant. So everything should be 75 ohm, but something's causing non-75 ohm, and so our corrosion is going to be what's causing something that's non-75 ohm. And what happens is the cable modem transmits a signal towards the CMTS, and it's going to hit some corrosion at the tap. That corrosion is going to cause non-75 ohm. It's going to cause our impedance mismatch, and that's going to cause our microreflection. So the cable modem signal hits that microreflection. Some of the cable modem signal is going to go towards the CMTS, but some of the cable modem signal is going to be reflected back. So here's our microreflection. Some of that signal gets reflected back to the cable modem. But it takes 2. It always takes 2 to tango, or 2 to have a fight, or 2 to have an echo cavity. The 2, or that second impairment, is our backward splitter in the home. So someone messed up here. Either the homeowner messed up, or the technician that installed this splitter, they put it in backwards. So this splitter should be reversed, right? So the splitter should be reversed 180 degrees. So when the signal comes back through, it's able to go back to the cable modem, but we have a reverse splitter. So as this signal comes back down, it's going to hit the wrong end of the splitter, and that's going to be our other reflection point. And that's going to cause the cable modem signal to be reflected back to the corroded tap. And now we have an echo cavity. And that echo cavity between the corroded tap and the backward splitter is going to cause that cable modem signal to be reflected back and forth between this drop. And that drop happens to be approximately 255 feet in length. It's a pretty long drop, but that's going to be reported back to our Pnm application based on these 3 taps. Tap 1, tap 2, tap 3 past the main tap. 3 times 85 is 255 feet apart. And so that is what gets reported back to us as our echo cavity. If we started at the cable modem and we counted 255 feet, that's going to give us an inaccurate distance. Our actual echo cavity is 255 feet. We need to do two things here to actually clean this up. We need to fix the corrosion on the tap, and we need to fix this reverse splitter. And then we're going to see our transmit levels come down on our cable modem. So probably another symptom we saw here is the cable modem transmit was at a very, very high level. It's one of the reasons we see cable modem transmit levels too high very often in subscribers' homes. We're like, well, why is this cable modem's transmit so high? Maybe I'll change the padding, maybe I'll change on the line extender, or maybe I'll try to change the tap on this subscriber's home. Those are the wrong things to do. The right things to do is to get in the subscriber's home, fix the corrosion, fix the backward splitter. And remember, never start at the back of the cable modem and walk to where the problem is. Figure out where the issues are inside the subscriber's home. Another thing that we do to get even more accurate in calculating those distance, getting that 255-foot distance in the previous slide, is we do interpolation. All interpolation is we have two data points for those digital taps, but we want to try to do the estimation a little bit more accurate. So we draw basically we interpolate between the data points. So here's our taps on the previous slide. We interpolate between the taps. If we said, well, this was 255 feet, we may estimate a little bit lower and say it's actually going to be, maybe 238 feet, and that tries to get us a little bit more accurate. One of the things you may see in Pnm applications is you get a lot of footages that are kind of similar, and that's due to interpolation. So if you see maybe footages that are kind of consistent, it happens because of interpolation in Pnm applications. So thanks to Bruce Caravan for providing this slide on how we do interpolation in Pnm. Another thing that you see in a lot of Pnm applications is part of the VTDRs or ETDRs, that echo cavity distances, it gives us the ability to also provide opens and shorts. So we can, again, when we provide this, I want to reinforce when we say, hey, this echo cavity is, in this case, 777 feet. These are estimates. We see a lot of times that some vendors say, hey, our accuracy is to within 1 or 2 or 3 feet of accuracy. I really want to encourage, recommend to people, sometimes these are marketing recommendations. We're kind of, we can't violate the laws of physics with our Pnm tools because we only have 24 taps, 24 digital taps in our pre-equalizers. And what we found over time is sometimes we can have an error of up to 50 feet, sometimes maybe even more. So when we show these virtual time domain reflectometers or the E-time domain reflectometers, whatever we're calling them in our Pnm applications, I highly encourage that before you use this to go out and actually dig a hole in the ground, please shoot them with a real TDR, a real time domain reflectometer, because again, sometimes these will be spot on. I've seen customers dig holes with these using my own Pnm application from NimbleThis, but sometimes they can have an inaccuracy of up to 50 feet, which means you don't want to dig a hole and be 50 feet off from where that hole is. So be cautious before you dig. There are inherent inaccuracies with Pnm tools. But what do we mean when we see there's a short? So with a short, there could be water in cables, smashed cables, buried cables with dings or dent, a connector with a center Caesar screw if the pin is touching. Opens, we're suggesting this could be missing or damaged terminators at the end of line, radio cracks in cables, loose center Caesar screws if the pin is missing. But again, these are only recommendations. These are not 100% accurate, again, because of the inherent inaccuracies that we have within the Pnm tools. So Pnm in action, we'll see some practical examples here. So these are from live stuff that we've done out in the field and how we recommend that you can use Pnm. This is from a mobile app here, so not as detailed, but one of the things that we recommend, Icfr, your in-channel frequency response. If that value is greater than 3 dB, it's almost always an in-home issue. You typically don't see your in-channel frequency response with a peak to valley of greater than 3 dB for outside plant impairments. In this case, our Icfr, you can see it was greater than 3 dB for both of our upstreams. There's only 2 upstreams here. The other thing we look for is generally with in-home impairments, taps 9 and 10. So that's the first 2 digital pre-equalizer tap after the main tap. Those are going to be significantly elevated. So generally in-home impairments, you're going to see digital taps 9 and 10. Those are going to be the most elevated. In my application, my Pnm application, we have like digital taps. We have an extra red line just around taps 9 and 10 to kind of highlight that as being the in-home tap. We also show a TDR. So the TDR is normally for in-home problems. You can see your TDR is 91 and 81 feet respectively. So that's saying your echo cavity for your in-home is 91 feet and 81 feet. So in your upstream frequencies are, you'll find each upstream gets a little bit impaired or by the distance calculation is frequency dependent. So even though like your one frequency, your 32 megahertz frequency shows an echo cavity of 91 feet, and your 37 megahertz frequency shows an echo cavity of 81 feet. So yeah, so Mike, so can you touch on the shape or geometry of the cable in relation to its impedance? I don't think everyone understands or appreciates how physical shape can affect impedance. So I think so definitely that's what we're talking about right here. So frequency and impairments are definitely related to each other. And we get into that right here. So like 32 megahertz is impacted slightly less than 37 megahertz. And that's because anytime you have a leak at one frequency, it may be more impacted by that impairment. We can definitely see that here. So when we looked at this impairment, so we saw this impairment in Pnm. We're like, this customer is definitely going to have impairments on their upstream. We want to be proactive about it. Let's go look at it. This was a drop cable. I can only fit so many slides on this. So we pulled down the drop and we saw this drop had been repaired here. It had a nice splice enclosure on it. It was wrapped really, really well. When we opened it up though, this was the actual connector that was on there. So it had been spliced, but unfortunately it had crimp-on connectors on it. And you can see there's some corrosion on this crimp-on connector here. So water had eventually infiltrated this splice-on connector, and water is like, it is that one thing that will just kill connectors, particularly crimp-on connectors. And I always strongly advise against any type of crimp-on connectors. And this is where we could see once water got into these crimp-on connectors, it just devastated the upstream. And we can see how it impacted the Icfr. We can see how it impacted the digital taps on here. And then it created this echo cavity. So once we didn't even bother replacing these connectors. We just replaced the drop altogether. And then we ended up with a completely flat upstream. So that was the first in-home one. Another in-home one, and this Pnm is so powerful at identifying in-home connectors or in-home issues. This was another one, a bad connector on the back of the modem. These are customer specials. You can thank your subscribers for doing this for you every single time. No matter how good of a connector you put on your subscriber's home, they're always going to be notorious for moving your cable modem and putting on their own crimp-on connector. So another customer special. But this is a case where you'll see your in-home TDR 334 feet. This is actually a case where from the connector to your drop, now again, I say it always takes two, so it was the actual, we needed a corrosion on the drop itself to create this, but the in-home connector was the root cause. Really bad Icfr. So our Icfr is greater than 3 dB. We see our in-home taps, so tap 9 and 10, the most elevated, And then this is the root cause here, causing really bad impairments for the subscriber. Now, outside plant issues. I have to spend a little bit of time on this slide. So the next 5 minutes will be really enlightening for you, or if you're experienced to echo plants, this will just be a refresher for you. So outside plant echo cavities, really, really important that you understand this. So I'm going to show these 3 modems here on the bottom and the modem in this house. These 3 modems are all being impacted by an outside plant echo cavity. Here's our echo cavity marked in red here. So this is where we're getting the echo. And the rest of these modems, the green modems, they're not being impacted by an outside plant echo. So I've already talked about an in-home echo cavity, right? That was the slide that I said, hey, I can't remember if this is Comcast or Cable Labs slide, and we had the echo inside the home. Here we have an outside plant echo, and I'm going to show you a couple examples of these next. So make sure you understand how this echo works. So the 3 cable modems in red, they're all transmitting in the upstream. That cable modem signal in the upstream is eventually going to hit this red passive device here. And we're saying this is a potential area where there is some corrosion on this passive device. Those cable modem signals in the upstream, they're going to hit this device. Some of the signal is going to go to the CMTS, and some of the signal is going to get reflected back to the cable modem. As they get reflected back to the cable modem, they're going to hit another passive device here that has some corrosion on that, and that's going to reflect the signal back to the CMTS. So again, we're going to have all of these 3 modems sending signals on the upstream. They're going to hit this device. Some signal is going to go to the CMTS, some signal is going to get reflected back. So 3 cable modems, all their signal, a little signal goes to the CMTS, a little signal gets reflected back. Now we have signals bouncing back and forth. So for all these cable modems, some of their signal got to the CMTS and some signal got reflected back, and then some signals got reflected back to the CMTS. So the big problem here is that first signal that made it to the CMTS, some signal got reflected back, and then some signal got back to the CMTS. This is our echo cavity. So we have signals making it to the CMTS, reflected back, and then making it to the CMTS. This is our impedance mismatch. This is our echo cavity. When signals get to the CMTS, a reflection occurs, and then some more signals go to the CMTS. We have a microreflections. So the first set of signals that made it to the CMTS, and then the second set of signals that came and bounced to the CMTS, we have collisions occurring at the CMTS. The first set of signals and then the reflected set of signals. Now the CMTS has a problem. It's trying to demodulate, it starts to demodulate the first signal coming from the cable modem, then suddenly a second reflected signal comes into that CMTS and says, wow, I had a problem here, guys. I was demodulating signals coming from a cable modem, then I had a reflected signal coming in and it collided with me. So I thought I was going to be able to demodulate that cable modem signal until its reflected signal came in and collided. Now I have collisions at the input of me of the CMTS, so I couldn't demodulate that cable modem signal. So what the CMTS will do is part of that station maintenance, it'll communicate back to the CMTS and say, or to the cable modem and say, we have a micro reflection in the plant down here in this echo cavity. It'll adjust the cable modem's pre-equalizers to basically null out this micro reflection. We'll see the pre-equalizers in the cable modems adjust to create a standing wave in this echo cavity. Now these 3 cable modems will all report back that they're creating basically the inverse of the standing wave so that they can transmit back to the cable modem. So now we know where the standing wave is by looking at the pre-equalizers of this cable modem. And basically we can plot this echo cavity on the map. We know exactly where the echo cavity is. The cable modems in green are no longer, they're not seeing this echo cavity because they're all upstream of the echo cavity. So we can segment this plant and we can draw a line in here and we can say, okay, we know where the echo cavity is. We know the intensity to the echo cavity. We know what cable modems are part of the echo cavity. And we also know, so if any of these subscribers call in and say they're having issues, we know it's important not to send a technician to any of these individual homes. We want to send a technician out to this part of the plant, and we have an echo cavity of, say, 500 feet. So we've basically divided and conquered this entire HFC plant to say somewhere in this portion of the plant, there's an echo cavity of 500 feet between these two passive devices. Could be the passive devices itself, or it could be a radio crack in the coax cable, a squirrel chew in a coax cable. If you're living in a rural area, someone could have taken a shotgun and shot the coax cable. We don't know exactly what the problem is, but we know where the problem is and the intensity of the problem and the number of subscribers impacted. Let's go fix the problem. So let's see how this starts to look in the real world. So down here, here's our blue modems that are impacted. Here's our modems that are non-impacted. These are our green modems, or in this case, we're just shading them gray. Here's our echo cavity distance. In this case, it's 93 or 96 meters. Again, remember I said there's some inherent inaccuracies because we can't pinpoint this to within 1 foot of accuracy. So don't believe people when they say, oh, we'll nail that echo cavity down to within 1 foot. We can't violate the laws of physics when we only have 24 digital taps. And here's our standing wave. Remember I said the more sinusoidal waves or the more echoes that we have on that, basically the more points that we have on our standing wave, the more that we know that it's further out in the outside plant. Then we break out our plant maps. And our plant maps here, we can say, well, you know, this kind of looks like that first inspection point that we could go, that first tap that we saw in the plant. Here's that other tap. So maybe we'll look at these two taps. And then we saw on our VTDR was saying, well, it's about 96 meters, but when we actually look at it on our plant map, we see our plant map says, well, it's 104 meters. Again, getting back to that inherent inaccuracy, we can't violate the laws of physics. So, you know, 96 meters, 104 meters, we're getting kind of close. So the first place we go to that first splitter, we break open that first splitter, and what do we see? We see there's a lot of corrosion around this splitter. The rubber gasket that should have been around this splitter wasn't even present. So the last person who did maintenance on this splitter, when they pulled it open, that rubber gasket around there dropped off. They put the splitter cover back on, and they didn't put the splitter gasket back on. So a lot of water's been getting in there. Remember I said water? Yeah, water's not so good on our passive components. Lots of corrosion build up. So now when we replace this splitter, that impairment goes away and we get rid of that echo cavity. So water was the root cause of this. Our next real world example, so our previous one was actually using Pnm proactively. This one, we're using Pnm reactively because this came in with a referral. Subscriber was calling in complaining and said that their modem would not lock up at all. So the technician arrived at the tap and the forward levels appear to have and this is actually unique because they said forward levels were perfect. So, you know, this is a case where they measured everything with a regular handheld meter. Nothing showed up as bad. And that's the challenge we often fall into without Pnm. We can measure everything with a meter, forward levels look good, but when we have Pnm, it can really help from a troubleshooting standpoint where the Icfr is all over the place, in-channel frequency response. And you're not going to see in-channel frequency response with a handheld meter. So this is where Pnm can really help in a reactive mode. So the cause of the correlation group, and the correlation group, when you look at it on Pnm, is all of these blue modems. You can see there's still a lot of other red modems and green modems from a pre-equalizer standpoint, but the blue modems are the correlation group where you're really seeing an in-channel frequency response issue. And if we look at our digital taps, so digital tap 23, that's a tap way out there. That's saying that we have an outside plant problem that's pretty far out. And we can also see that we have a really high intensity sine wave here, meaning there's many peaks to this sine wave. So the cause of the correlation group was a faulty installation where the pin going from the line extender to the tap was too short. So right here, we can see the pin going into the line extender was too short. And if you look at the very end of the pin here, the center seizure screwing down on that pin, it was barely catching the pin. We can see this was just cut off. This is how long the pin should have been. So this is just craftsmanship here. That the dude that cut the pin just cut the pin a little too short, and this caused mass chaos for a lot of subscribers, but only one subscriber was calling in. We see that far too often. It's just, you know, like one person will call in, but many subscribers were being impacted. So by fixing just this one connector here, we actually fixed many subscribers. And that's the beauty of Pnm, you know, just having that visibility, that knowledge of where to go. We can fix many subscribers by fixing one connector. So remember, this, like, just having visibility into this can be your friend, and having visibility into both group delay and micro reflections, kind of those hidden impairments that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Those can be tremendously helpful because they're not often caught by your typical troubleshooting meters. And that causes many cycles to be burnt. If you're like running around with just a meter that doesn't give you this visibility, you're probably replacing modems and going back to the same home trying to troubleshoot something when you could have visibility in this. And that's where you lose cycles sometimes. So getting into the future of Pnm, yeah, I mentioned I really wasn't going to talk about full band capture, but full band capture is such a powerful tool for Pnm. It gives us visibility into all of these downstream signals in every subscriber's home. It's not just the DOCSIS signals, but it's everything that all the RF signals that we send into a subscriber's home. Then we take it one step further. We apply machine learning, and then we can say, well, you know, is it just a subscriber's home that I should go into, or is it an outside plant problem? And that's what we're showing here. There's an outside plant problem with these subscribers. That's, you know, we've got roll-off, standing waves, tilt, all kinds of nastiness going on. I think there's some water in the coax on this one here that's impacting a number of subscribers. So, you know, if you got one subscriber calling in and that subscriber is part of a correlation group here, I don't want to send a technician to that subscriber's home. I want to send an outside plant guy to this correlation group, and we'll fix all these subscribers at once. We don't want to burn out subscribers, and we don't want to burn out techs for an outside plant problem. Same with RxMER. So, you know, if you're running OFDM or OFDMA, you want to be able to look at the RxMER per subcarrier. That's looking at the MER of every subcarrier in the OFDM and OFDMA channels, so you can actually look at the signal quality of your OFDM and OFDMA channels. And then, you know, does my subscriber have an issue? Do I send a technician to the subscriber's house? Or in this case, I've got many subscribers that have poor RxMER. That's an outside plant problem. So don't send a technician to an in-home problem when I have an outside plant problem. So it's really good to be able to have that visibility. And then another thing that we're doing is our CMTSs and our CCAP devices give us the ability to do upstream spectrum analysis. And this is really becoming important with RPDs, and RFI nodes, whether we're doing that with RFI, MACFI, VCMTSs, whatever it is. Having the ability to tap in directly to our CMTSs, CCAPs, RPD nodes, and get that return pass spectrum data. It also gives us a lot of ability to, you know, at the same time as we're looking at return pass spectrum analysis, we can get correctable, uncorrectable code word errors at the same time because we're communicating directly with the CMTS. And we just continue to, as I said, Pnm just keeps getting better and better all the time. We're getting closer to being able to provide concise details of the what, the when, the where, the who, everything that's failing in a predictive way using machine learning. I really hesitate to use terms like AI because most of the times we're constricted to using cable operators' data centers where we can't really use GPUs or TPUs to run true AI. So most things we're doing is on machine learning, but even that, we can do a lot of cool things where when we when we provide data to our, that end data, like we pull up a MAC address for a particular subscriber's account, we can provide things at the top of that that automatically identify to the CSR or the technician that, hey, this customer's modem is failing MER for the SC-QAM. It has spectra impairments for adjacency and roll-off. RxMER is failing for RxMER per subcarrier. It has modem efficiency errors. All this is based on things we're doing in machine learning. And then as we look at extending the spectrum to 204 and eventually 684 megahertz for DOCSIS 4.0, this really becomes important because DOCSIS 1 was easy, right? Troubleshooting one downstream and one upstream, super easy. But when we're looking at troubleshooting 32 downstreams, multiple OFDM downstreams, multiple SC-QAMs in the upstreams, multiple OFDMA channels in the upstream, things get crazy complex. And that's what we look at doing for DOCSIS 4.0. So, we're hopefully, and we're really begging vendors, and this is the ask from the cable operator side. There's only partial support for DOCSIS 3.1 PNM capabilities on the CMTS side. We've got mostly full support on the cable modem side, but we only have partial support on the CMTS side for DOCSIS 3.1. So from a PNM vendor side, that's really limiting us. From an MSO side, that's really limiting MSO side for visibility. So the big ask is ask your CMTS vendors, please support DOCSIS 3.1 PNM capabilities, because when we start getting into DOCSIS 4.0, it's going to be really, really tough for vendors, for PNM vendors, and for cable operators to have good visibility to enable us to really continue the support that we're doing to make DOCSIS 4.0 networks really sustainable and supportable for all the new tech and cool stuff that's coming out in DOCSIS 4.0. And then finally, the work cited that I did in this, I mainly focused on the PNM working groups, version 2 and version 4. There's a ton of other work that's going on out there, particularly PNM, the Cable Labs PNM working groups, and the SCTE working group 7. A lot of great people are working on those, and I encourage everyone to get involved with the SCTE working group 7 and also the Cable Labs PNM working group. So many great people involved. I'm so lucky to be working with such great people on those working groups, and I'm pleased to be working on them. So with that, we have some more time. I apologize, I wasn't able to keep up on the chat, but I'd like to open up the rest of the time for questions that I was not able to cover in the presentation. With that, Mike, if you want to open up for questions, I can take as many as you'd like to ask. I'll mute myself, Mike, so I don't get feedback.
Let's try that again. Can you hear me now, Brady?
Try that again. Can you hear me now, Brady? Try that again. Can you hear me now, Brady?
I can hear you. We just have some echo. The other thing I could do, Mike, is I can look at the chat if you want and see if there's any questions I missed from there.
Testing. Okay. Yeah, the feedback was us. Sorry about that, Brady.
No problem. It sounds clear now.
It sounds clear now.
Okay. Questions from the room? Anybody have any questions for Brady? I've got a bunch, but I know I want to do a shameless plug for you. A lot of this material you and John have covered on your YouTube channel, and I've watched a lot of those videos. So I'm gonna take the audience here in the room and maybe send them towards some of your media pages and give them access to more of this type of training and more in depth and maybe even more advanced in the future for some of our more seasoned and veteran techs. And also appreciate the plug for the PNM Working Group 7. and all the great work that's going on there. So we're gonna, I think, pull some more from that this afternoon and talk about the downstream full band capture in conjunction with yours. So if we don't have any questions from the room, I want to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts from PennOhio, Brady, for taking some time out of your day and helping us with the very basics, and then even some more advanced into the plant Pnm information and how it works, and demystifying some of that. So thank you very much. We greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Totally my pleasure.
Totally my pleasure.
Thanks for the plug on the YouTube videos. John and I have been doing those for, I don't know, quite a few years. I think we have just about 90 videos we put out. I want to thank John for his long-term support on the YouTube videos. John's been a tremendous supporter of those and had just, he's a wealth of information. I know John's up next. I'm sure he'll do a great job on his OFDM FDMA presentation. If he gets past his agenda slide, you got to get him off of his agenda slide. He could spend 45 minutes on that. But John, good luck on your presentation. And I think John and I are doing a YouTube presentation this Friday. We'll be covering a number of questions we've had in our backlog from from our other videos that we have up. So definitely this Friday, 2 p.m. if people want to tune in and catch us on our live stream, 2 p.m. Eastern time this Friday. Definitely catch us and throw in questions if you have. Try to stump us. People do that often. So otherwise, thanks everyone for watching. I appreciate you taking the time, and we'll catch you on another time. So thanks everyone.
Hey, before we leave, we're going to have you try and stump our audience here. So we have some prizes that we want to give away, some door prizes at the in-person chapter event here outside of Pittsburgh. So can you give us a question for our audience and see if anybody gets it right? We'll give them some PennOhio swag.
Sure. So if you have a 6.4 megahertz upstream, what is the estimated distance in feet for each tap?
Was it 85? We have a winner.
Woohoo!
Thank you, Brady. Okay, gang, we're going to take a quick break. Again, thank you very much, Brady. Look forward to talking to you again soon. And then our next presenter is going to be Suresh Parathi from Comcast to talk about Wi-Fi. John's actually not until this afternoon. So if you want to step away, Brady, you can come back and heckle John later.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Take care.
Thanks, Brady. Okay, folks.